All right, y'all. So I'm reading from 164 to 183, and this is the last chapter of spring. I think this is the spring portion of the book, because like I said, I went to 183 and realized the next chapter is summer. So before summer, spring. So all right, I think this is the last chapter in part 3, which was spring. See the dog bow. Wow goes the dog. Do you want to play? Do you want to play with Jan? See the dog run. Once there was an old man who loved things, for the slightest contact with people produced in him a faint but persistent nausea. He could not remember when this distaste began, nor could he remember ever being free of it. As a young boy, he had been greatly disturbed by this revulsion, which others did not seem to share, but having got a fine education, he learned, among other things, the word misanthrope. Knowing his label provided him with both comfort and courage. He believed that to name an evil was to neutralize it, if not annihilate it. Then, too, he had read several books and made the acquaintance of several great misanthropes of the ages, whose spiritual company soothed him and provided him with yardsticks for measuring his whims, his yearnings, and his antipathies. Moreover, he found misanthropy an excellent means of developing character. When he subdued his revulsion and occasionally touched, helped, counseled, or befriended somebody, he was able to think of his behavior as generous and his intentions as noble. When he was enraged by some human effort or flaw, he was able to regard himself as discriminating, fastidious, and full of nice scruples. As in the case of many misanthropes, his disdain for people led him into a profession designed to serve them. He was engaged in a line of work that was dependent solely on his ability to win the trust of others, and one in which the most intimate relationships were necessary. Having dallied with the priesthood in the Anglican Church, he abandoned it to become a caseworker. Time and misfortune, however, conspired against him, and he settled finally on a profession that brought him both freedom and satisfaction. He became a reader, advisor, and interpreter of dreams. It was a profession that suited him well. His hours were his own, and the competition was slight. The clientele was already persuaded and therefore manageable, and he had numerous opportunities to witness human stupidity without sharing it or being compromised by it, and to nurture his fastidiousness by viewing physical decay. Although his income was small, he had no taste for luxury. His experience in the monastery had solidified his natural asceticism, while it developed his preference for solitude. Celibacy was a haven, silence a shield. All his life he had a fondness for things, not the acquisition of wealth or beautiful objects, but a genuine love of worn objects, a coffee pot that had been his mother's, a welcome mat from the door of a rooming house he once lived in, a quilt from a Salvation Army store counter. It was as though his disdain of human contact had converted itself into a craving for things humans had touched. The residue of the human spirit smeared on inanimate objects was all he could withstand of humanity. To contemplate, for example, evidence of human footsteps on the mat, absorb the smell of the quilt and wallow in the sweetness certainty that many bodies had sweated. Absorb the smell of the quilt and wallow in the sweet certainty that many bodies had sweated, slept, dreamed, may love, been ill, and even died under it. Wherever he went, he took along his things and was always searching for others. This thirst for worn things led to casual but habitual examinations of trash barrels and alleys and wastebaskets in public places. All in all, his personality was an arabesque, intricate, symmetrical, balanced, and tightly constructed, except for one flaw. The careful design was marred occasionally by a rare but keen sexual cravings. He could have been an active homosexual, but lacked the courage. Bestiality did not occur to him, and sodomy was quite out of the question, for he did not experience sustained erections and could not endure the thought of somebody's houses. And besides, the one thing that disgusted him more than entering and caressing a woman was caressing and being caressed by the man. One thing that disgusted him more than entering and caressing a woman was caressing and being caressed by a man. In any case, his cravings, although intense, never relished physical contact. He abhorred flesh on flesh. Body odor, breath odor overwhelmed him. The sight of dried matter in the corner of his eye, decayed or missing teeth, earwax, blackheads, moles, blisters, skin crusts, all the natural excretions and protections the body was capable of, disquieted him. His attentions, therefore, gradually settled on those humans whose bodies were least offensive, children. His attentions therefore gradually settled on those humans whose bodies were least offensive, children, and since he was too diffident to confront homosexuality, since little boys were insulting, scary, and stubborn, the further limited his interest to little girls. They were usually manageable and frequently seductive. His sexuality was anything but lewd. His patronage of little girls smacked of innocence and was associated in his mind with cleanliness. He was what one might call a very clean old man, a cinnamon-eyed West Indian with lightly brown skin. Although his given name was printed on the sign in the kitchen window and on the business cards he circulated, he was called by the townspeople Soaphead Church. No one knew where the church part came from, perhaps somebody's recollection of his days as a guest preacher, these reverends who had been called but who had no flock or coop and were constantly visiting other churches, sitting on the altar with the host preacher. But everybody knew what Soaphead meant. The tight curly hair that took on and held a sheen and wave when pomaded with soap lather, a sort of primitive process. He had been reared in a family proud of its academic accomplishments and in mixed blood. In fact, they believed the former was based on the latter, a Sir Whitcomb, some decaying British nobleman who chose to disintegrate under a son more useful than England's, and introduced the white strain into the family in the early 1800s. Being a gentleman by order of the king, he had done the civilized thing for his mulatto bastard, provided it with 300 pounds sterling to great satisfaction of the bastard's mother, who felt that fortune had smiled on her. The bastard, too, was grateful, and regarded as his life's goal the hoarding of this white strain. He bestowed his favors on a 15-year-old girl of similar parentage. She, like a good Victorian parody, learned from her husband all that was worth learning, to separate herself in body, mind, and spirit from all that suggested Africa, to cultivate the habits, tastes, preferences that her absent father-in-law and foolish mother-in-law would have approved. They transferred this Anglophilia to their 6 children and 16 grandchildren, except for an occasional and unaccountable insurgent who chose a restive black that married up, lightening the family complexion and thinning out the family's features. With the confidence born of a conviction of superiority, they performed well at schools. They were industrious or orderly and energetic, hoping to prove beyond a doubt the Gobineau's hypothesis that all civilization is derived from the white race, that none can exist without its help, and that a society is great and brilliant only so far as it preserves the blood of the noble group that created it. Thus they were seldom overlooked by the schoolmasters who recommend promising students for study abroad. The men studied medicine, law, theology, and emerged repeatedly in the powerless government offices available to the native population. That they were corrupt in public and private practice, both lecherous and lascivious, was considered their noble right and thoroughly enjoyed by most of the less gifted population. As the years passed, due to the carelessness of some of the Whitcomb brothers, it became difficult to maintain their whiteness, and some distant and some not so distant relatives married each other. No obviously bad effects were noticed from these ill-advised unions, but 1 or 2 old maids or gardener boys marked a weakening of faculties and a disposition toward eccentricity in some of the children, some flaw outside the usual alcoholism and lechery. They blamed the flaw on intermarriage with the family, however, not on the original genes of the decaying lord. In any case, there were flukes, no more than any other family to be sure, but more dangerous because more powerful. One of them was a religious fanatic who founded his own secret sect and fathered 4 sons, one of whom became a schoolmaster, known for the precision of his justice and the control in his violence. This schoolmaster married a sweet, indolent, half-Chinese girl for whom the fatigue of bearing a son was too much. She died soon after childbirth. Her son, named Elihu Micah Whitcomb, provided the schoolmaster with ample opportunity to work out his theories of education, discipline, and the good life. Little Elihu learned everything he needed to know well, particularly the fine art of self-deception. He read greedily but understood selectively, choosing the bits and pieces of other men's ideas that supported whatever predilection he had at the moment. Thus he chose to remember Hamlet's abuse of Ophelia, but not Christ's love of Mary Magdalene. Hamlet's frivolous politics, but not Christ's serious anarchy. He noticed Gibbon's acidity, but not his tolerance. Othello's love for the fair Desdemona, but not Iago's perverted love of Othello. The works he admired most were Dante's, those he despised most were Dostoevsky's. For all his exposure to the best minds of the Western world, he allowed only the narrowest interpretation to touch him. For all his exposure to the best minds of the Western world, he allowed only the narrowest interpretation to touch him. He responded to his father's controlled violence by developing hard habits and a soft imagination, a hatred of and fascination with any hint of disorder or decay. At 17, however, he met his Beatrice, who was 3 years his senior, a lovely, laughing, big-legged girl who worked as a clerk in a Chinese department store. Valma, so strong was her affection and zest for life, she did not eliminate the frail, sickly Elihu from it. She found his fastidiousness and complete lack of humor touching and longed to introduce him to the idea of delight. He resisted the introduction, but she married him anyway, only to discover that he was suffering from and enjoying an invincible melancholy. When she learned 2 months into the marriage how important his melancholy was to him, that he was very interested in altering her joy to a more academic gloom, that he equated lovemaking with communion and the Holy Grail, she simply left. She had not lived by the sea all those years, listened to the war men's songs all that time, to spend her life in the soundness cave of Elihu's mind. He never got over her desertion. She was to have been the answer to his unstated, unacknowledged question. Where was a life to counter the encroaching non-life? Balmo was to rescue him from the non-life he had learned on the flat side of his father's belt. But he resisted her with such skill that she was finally driven out to escape the inevitable boredom produced by such a dainty life. Young Elihu was saved from visible shattering by the steady hand of his father, who reminded him of the family's reputation and Valma's questionable one. He then pursued his studies with more vigor than before and decided at last to enter the ministry, where he was advised that he had no avocation. He left the island and came to America to study the budding field of psychiatry. But the subject required too much truth, too many confrontations, and offered too little support to a failing ego. He drifted into sociology, then physical therapy. This diversion in education continued for 6 years when his father refused to support him any longer, until he found himself. Elihu, not knowing where to look, was thrown back on his own devices and found himself quite unable to earn money. He began to sink into a rapidly fraying gentility, punctuated with the few white-collar occupations available to black people, regardless of their noble bloodliness in America. Dad's clerk at a colored hotel in Chicago, insurance agent, traveling salesman for a cosmetics firm catering to blacks. He finally settled in Lorain, Ohio in 1931, palming himself off as a minister and inspiring awe with the way he spoke English. The women of the town early discovered his celibacy, and not being able to comprehend his rejection of them, decided that he was supernatural rather than unnatural. Once he understood the decision, he quickly followed through, accepting the name Soaphead Church and the role they had given him. He rented a kind of backroom apartment from a deeply religious old lady named Bertha Reese. She was clean, quiet, and very close to total deafness. The lodgings were ideal in every way but one. Bertha Reese had an old dog, Bob, who, although as deaf as quiet as she, was not as clean. He slept most of his days away on the back porch which was Elihu's entrance. The dog was too old to be of any use, and Bertha Reese had not the strength or presence of mind to care for him properly. She fed him and watered him and left him alone. The dog was mangy, like dirty, probably hair. His exhausted eyes ran with the sea-green matter around which gnats and flies clustered. Soaphead was revolted by Bob and wished he would hurry up and die. He regarded this wish for the dog's death as humane, for he could not bear, he told himself, to see anything suffer. It had not occurred to him that he was really concerned about his own suffering, since the dog had adjusted himself to frailty and old age. Soaphead finally determined to put an end to the animal's misery and bought some poison with which to do it. Wow, only the horror of having to go near him had prevented Soaphead from completing the mission. He waited for rage or blinding revulsion to spur him, living there among his worn things, rising early every morning. Dreamless sleeps, he counseled those who sought his advice. His business was dread. People came to him in dread, whispered in dread, wept and pleaded in dread, and dread was what he counseled. Singly they found their way to his door, wrapped each in a shroud stitched with anger, yearning, pride, vengeance, loneliness, misery, defeat, and hunger. They asked for the simplest of things: love, health, and money. Make him love me, tell me what his dream means. Help me get rid of this woman, make my mother give me back my clothes, stop my left hand from shaking, keep my baby's ghost off the stove, break so-and-so's fix. To all of these requests he addressed himself. His practice was to do what he was bid, not to suggest to a party that perhaps the request was unfair, mean, or hopeless. With only occasional and increasingly rare encounters with the little girls he could persuade to be entertained by him, he lived rather peaceably among his things, admitting to no regrets. He was aware, of course, that something was awry in his life and all lives, but put the problem where it belonged, at the foot of the originator of life. He believed that since decay, vice, filth, and disorder were pervasive, they must be in the nature of things. Evil existed because God had created it. He, God, had made a sloven and unforgivable error in judgment, designing an imperfect universe. Theologians justify the presence of corruption as a means by which men strove or tested and triumphed, a triumph of cosmic neatness. But this neatness, the neatness of Dante, was in the orderly sanctioning and segregating of all levels of evil and decay. And the world, it was not so. The most exquisite-looking ladies sat on toilets, and the most dreadful-looking had pure and holy yearnings. God had done a poor job, and Soap had suspected that he himself could have done better. It was in fact a pity that the Maker had not sought his counsel. Soaphead was reflecting once again on these thoughts one late hot afternoon when he heard a tap on his door. Opening, he saw a little girl, quite unknown to him. She was about 12 or so, he thought, and seemed to him pitifully unattractive. When he asked her what she wanted, she did not answer, but held out to him one of his cards advertising his gifts and services. So I'm like in a parking lot right now. People are getting back to their car. So I'm pretty like reading this out loud, like I'm pretty like kind of afraid. Man, what people would think about me. This guy's alone in his car reading some book about this guy, Soaphead Church, some like fucking saint, but he likes little girls, so it's like, it's kind of, so forgive me. If you are overcome with trouble and conditions that are not natural, I can remove them. Overcome spells, bad luck, and evil influences. Remember, I am a true spiritualist and psychic reader, born with power, and I will help you. Satisfaction in one visit. During many years of practice, I have brought together many in marriage and reunited many who were separated. If you are unhappy, discouraged, or in distress, I can help you. Does bad luck seem to follow you? Has the one you love changed? I can tell you why. I will tell you who your enemies and friends are. If the one you love is true or false, if you are sick, I can show you the way to health. I locate lost and stolen articles. Satisfaction guaranteed. Soap at church told her to come in. What can I do for you, my child? She stood there, her hands folded across her stomach, a little protruding pot of tummy. Maybe you can do it for me, do work for you. I can't go to school no more. I thought maybe you could help me. Help you how? Tell me, don't be frightened. My eyes. What about your eyes? I want them blue. Soaphead pursed his lips and let his tongue stroke a gold inlay. He thought it was at once the most fantastic and the most logical petition he had ever received. Here was an ugly little girl asking for beauty. A surge of love and understanding swept through him, but was quickly replaced by anger. Anger that he was powerless to help her. Of all the wishes people had brought him, money, love, revenge, this seemed to him the most poignant and the one most deserving of fulfillment. A little black girl who wanted to rise up out of the pit of her blackness to see the world with blue eyes. His outrage grew and felt like power. For the first time, he honestly wished he could work miracles. Never before had he really wanted the true and holy power, only the power to make others believe he had it. It seemed so sad, so frivolous, that mere mortality, not judgment, kept him from it, or did it? With a trembling hand, he made the sign of the cross over her. His flesh crawled in that hot, dim little room of worn things. He was chilled. I can do nothing for you, my child. I am not a magician. I work only through the Lord. He sometimes uses me to help people. All I can do is offer myself to him as the instrument through which he works. If he wants your wish granted, he will do it. Soaphead walked to the window, his back to the girl. His mind raced, stumbled, and raced again. How to frame the next sentence, how to hang on to the feeling of power. His eye fell on old Bob sleeping on the porch. We must make some offering, that is, some contact with nature. Perhaps some simple creature might be the vehicle through which he will speak. Let us see. He knelt down at the window and moved his lips. After what seemed a suitable length of time, he rose and went to the icebox that stood near the other window. From it, he removed a small packet wrapped in pinkish butcher paper. From a shelf, he took a small brown bottle and sprinkled some of its contents on the substance inside of the paper. He put the packet partly open on the table. Take this food and give it to the creature sleeping on the porch. Make sure he eats it, and mark well how he behaves. If nothing happens, you will know that God has refused you. If the animal behaves strangely, your wish will be granted on the day following this one. The girl packed up the packet. The odor of the dark, sticky meat made her want to vomit. She put a hand on her stomach. Courage, courage, my child. These things are not granted to faint hearts. She nodded and swallowed visibly, holding down the vomit. Soaphead opened the door and she stepped over the threshold. Goodbye, God bless, he said, and quickly shut the door. At the window we stood watching her, his eyebrows pulled together into waves of compassion, his tongue fondling the worn gold in his upper jaw. He saw the girl bending down to the sleeping dog, who at her touch opened one liquid eye, matted in the corners with what looked like green glue. She reached down and touched the dog's head, stroking him gently. She placed the meat on the floor of the porch near his nose. The odor roused him. He lifted his head and got up to smell it better. He ate it in 3 or 4 gulps. The girl stroked his head again, and the dog looked up at her with soft triangle eyes. Suddenly he coughed, the cough of a phlegmy old man, and got to his feet. The girl jumped, the dog gagged, his mouth chomping the air, and promptly fell down. He tried to raise himself, could not. Tried again and half fell down the steps. Choking, stumbling, he moved like a broken toy around the yard. The girl's mouth was open, a little petal of tongue showing. She made a wild, pointless gesture with one hand and then covered her mouth with both hands. She was trying not to vomit. The dog fell again, a spasm jerking his body. Then he was quiet, the girl's hand covering her mouth. She backed away a few feet, then turned, ran out of the yard and down the walk. Oh, so he poisoned the dog, remember? Soaphead Church went to the table. He sat down with folded hands, balancing his forehead on the balls of his thumbs. Then he rose and went to a tiny night table with a drawer from which he took paper and a fountain pen. A bottle of ink was on the same shelf that he held the poison. With these things, he sat again at the table, slowly, carefully, relishing his penmanship. He wrote the following letter. To he who greatly ennobled human nature by creating it. Dear God, the purpose of this letter is to familiarize you with facts which either have escaped your notice or which you have chosen to ignore. Once upon a time, I lived greenly and youngish on one of your islands, and of the archipelago in the South Atlantic between North and South America, enclosing the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico, divided into the Great Antilles, the Lesser Antilles, and the Bahama Islands, not the windward or the leeward island colonies, mark you, but within, of course, the greater of the two Antilles. While the precision of my prose may be at times laborious, it is necessary that I identify myself to you clearly. Now, we in this colony took our own, the most dramatic and the most obvious of our white masters' characteristics, which were, of course, their worst. In retaining the identity of our race, we held fast to those characteristics most gratifying to sustain and least troublesome to maintain. Consequently, we were not royal but snobbish, not aristocratic but class conscious. We believed authority was cruelty to our inferiors, and education was being at school. We mistook violence for passion, and indolence for leisure, and thought recklessness was freedom. We raised our children and reared our crops. We let infants grow and property develop. Our manhood was defined by acquisitions, our womanhood by acquiescence, and the smell of your fruit and the labor of your days we abhorred. This morning, before the little black girl came, I cried for Velma, for not allowed, there was no wind to carry, bear, or even refuse to bear. It sounds so heavy with regret, but in my silent own lone way, I cried for Velma. You need to know about Velma to understand what I did today. She, Velma, left me the way people leave a hotel room. A hotel room is a place to be when you are doing something else. Of itself, it is of no consequences to one's major scheme. A hotel room is convenient, but its convenience is limited to the time you need it while you are in that particular town, that particular business. You hope it is comfortable, but prefer rather that it be anonymous. It is not, after all, where you live. When you no longer need it, you pay a little something for its use, say, "Thank you, sir," and when your business in that town is over, you go away from that room. Does anybody regret leaving a hotel room? Does anybody who has a home, a real home somewhere, want to stay there? Does anybody look back with affection or even disgust at a hotel room when they leave it? You can only love or despise whatever living was done in that room, the room itself, but you take a souvenir, no? I mean, not to remember the room, to remember rather the time and place of your business, your adventure. What can anyone feel for a hotel room? One doesn't any more feel for a hotel room than one expects a hotel room to feel for its occupant. That heavenly Father was how she left me, or rather, she never left me because she was never ever there. You remember, do you, how and of what we are made? Let me tell you now about the breasts of little girls. I apologize for the inappropriateness, is that it? The imbalance of loving them at awkward times of day and in awkward places, and the tastelessness of loving those which belong to members of my family. Do I have to apologize for loving strangers? But you too are amiss here, Lord. How, why did you allow it to happen? How was it I could not lift my eyes from the contemplation of your body and fall deeply into the contemplation of theirs? The buds on some of these saplings, they were mean, mean and tender. Mean little buds resisting the touch, springing like rubber but aggressive. Daring me to touch, commanding me to touch, not a bit shy as you suppose. They struck out at me, oh yes, at me, slender-chested, finger-chested lassies. Have you ever seen them, Lord? I mean, really seen them. One could not see them and not love them. You who made them must have considered them lovely, even as an idea. How much more lovely is the manifestation of that idea? I couldn't, as you must recall, keep my hands in my mouth off them. Salt sweet, like not quite ripe strawberries covered with the light salt sweat of running days and hopping, skipping, jumping hours. The love of them, the touch, taste, and feel of them was not just an easy, luxurious human vice. There were, for me, a thing to do instead of Papa, instead of Claude, instead of Velma, and I chose not to do without them. But I didn't go into the church, at least I didn't do that. As to what I did do, I told people I knew all about you, that I had received your powers. It was not a complete lie, but it was a complete lie. I should never have, I admit, I should have never taken their money in exchange for wild phrase, wild place, wild face lies. But mark you, I hated it. Not for a moment did I love the lies or the money, but consider the women who left the hotel room. Consider the green time, the noontime of the archipelago. Consider their hopeful eyes that were outdone only by their hoping breasts. Consider how I needed a comfortable evil to prevent my knowing what I could not bear to know. Consider how I hated and despised the money, and now consider, not according to my just deserts, but according to my mercy, the little black girl that came alooning at me today. Tell me, Lord, how could you leave a lass so long that she could find her way to me? How could you? I weep for you, Lord, and it is because I weep for you that I had to do your work for you. Do you know what she came for? Blue eyes. New blue eyes, she said, like she was buying shoes. I'd like a pair of new blue eyes. She must have asked you for them for a very long time, and you hadn't replied. A habit I could have told her long ago, habit broken for Job, but no more. She came to me for them. She had one of my cards, card enclosed. By the way, I added the Micah, Elihu Micah Whitcomb, but I am called Sopet Church. I cannot remember how or why I got the name. What makes one name more a person than another? Is the name the real thing then, and the person only what his name says? Is that why, to the simplest and friendliest of questions, what is your name, put to you by Moses, you will not say instead, I am who I am? Like Papa, I am what I am. Afraid you weren't you, to give out your name? Afraid they would know the name and then know you, and they wouldn't fear you. It's quite all right. Don't be vexed, I mean no offense. I understand, I have been a bad man too, and an unhappy man too. But someday I will die. I was always so kind. Why do I have to die? The little girls are the only things I'll miss. You know that when I touched their sturdy little tits and bit them just a little, I felt I was being friendly. I didn't want to kiss their mouths or sleep in the bed with them or take a child bride for my own. Playful, I felt unfriendly, not like the newspaper said, not like the people whispered. And they didn't mind at all, not at all. Remember how so many of them came back? Not one would even try to understand that. If I'd been hurting them, would they have come back? Two of them, Doreen and Sugar Babe, they'd come together. I gave them mints, money, and they'd eat ice cream with their legs open while I played with them. It was like a party, and those wasn't nastiness. There wasn't any filth, and there wasn't any odor, and there wasn't any groaning. Just a light, white laughter of little girls and me. A light, white laughter. And there wasn't any look, any long, funny look, any long, funny Velma look after. No. Look that makes you feel dirty afterward. That makes you want to die. With little girls, it is all clean and good and friendly. You have to understand, Lord, you said, suffer little children to come unto thee and harm them not. Did you forget? Did you forget about the children? Yes, you forgot. You let them go wanting, sit on road shoulders, crying next to their dead mothers. I've seen them charred, lame, hulked. You forgot, Lord. You forgot how and when to be God. That's why I changed the little black girl's eyes for her. I didn't touch her. Not a finger did I lay on her, but I gave her those blue eyes she wanted. Not for pleasure, not for money. I did what you did not, could not, will not do. I looked at the ugly little black girl. I loved her. I played you. And it was a very good show. I have caused a miracle. I gave her the eyes. I gave her the blue eyes. Blue, two blue eyes. Cobalt blue, a streak of it right out of your own blue heaven. No one else will see your blue eyes, but she will, and she will live happily ever after. I found it meet and right to do so. Now you are jealous of me. You see, I too have created, not aboriginally like you, but creation is a heady wine. But creation is a heady wine, more for the taster than the brewer. Having therefore imbibed, as it were, of the nectar, I am not afraid of you, of death, not even of life. And it's all right about Velma, and it's all right about Papa, and it's all right about the greater and the lesser Antilles. Quite all right, quite. With kindest regards, I remain your Elihu Micah Whitcomb. Soaphead Church folded the sheet of paper into 3 equal parts and slipped them into an envelope. Although he had no seal, he longed for sealing wax. He removed a cigar box from under the bed and rummaged about in it. There were some of his most precious things, a sliver of jade that had dislodged from a cuff link at the Chicago hotel, a gold pendant shaped like a Y with a piece of coral attached to it that had belonged to the mother he never knew, 4 large hairpins that Velma had left on the rim of the bathroom sink, a powder of blue girl's grain ribbon from the head of a little girl named Precious Jewel, a blackened faucet head from the sink in a jail cell in Cincinnati, 2 marbles he had found under a bench in Morningside Park on a very fine spring day, an old Lucky Heart catalog that smelled still of nut brown and mocha face powder and lemon vanishing cream. Distracted by his things, he forgot what he had been looking for. The effort to recall was too great. There was a buzzing in his head and a wash of fatigue overcame him. He closed his box, eased himself out on the bed, and slipped into an ivory sleep from which he could not hear the tiny yelps of an old lady who had come out of her candy store and found the still carcass of an old dog named Bob. Oh yeah, that was the end of spring. Now we are on summer. Alright, just under 30 minutes. Gotta sit up now. My neck is feeling sore. Oh yeah, so I got probably, that was the end of, I think it was the end of part 3, the last chapter of part 3. I got less than 15 pages, so I'm almost done. I can go on to my next book. Let's go. All right, y'all. Peace.